3 seconds of footage destroyed Jimmy Harris's entire life. 3 seconds on a police body cam where a man's face betrays the one secret that could never be taken back. The FBI had chased him for 15 years. The Chicago outfit had protected him for longer. But in those 3 seconds, when an EMT said the words, "She's alive," Jimmy Harris's expression revealed what no wiretap, no informant, and no federal investigation ever could. He'd tried to kill his wife, and she'd just refused to die. This is the true story of the 911 call that exposed a monster, the woman who survived the impossible, and the night that proved some secrets are too dark to stay buried. But before we dive into this nightmare, do me one favor. If you believe stories like Amy's deserve to be told, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. And comment below with the country you're watching from, because Amy's fight for survival deserves to be heard around the world. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The call came in at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night, November 17th. Cutting through the quiet static of the Lake Forest Emergency Dispatch Center like a knife. 911, what's your emergency? There was breathing on the other end, heavy, panicked. Then a voice cracked through, trembling with what sounded like pure terror. She's in the basement. I pulled her up. I tried to give her CPR. The man's words tumbled over each other, desperate and raw. Please, God, please hurry. I can't. Sir, I need you to stay calm. What's your address? 1247 Sheridan Place, Lake Forest. It's the Harris residence. Please, she's not breathing. Dispatcher Kelly Morrison had been doing this job for 12 years. She'd heard every kind of panic, every shade of grief. But something about this call made her spine straighten. There was something almost theatrical about the man's distress, like he was performing rather than feeling it. Sir, what's your name? Jimmy Harris. It's my wife, Amy. I just found her. Please, you have to send someone now. Units are already on their way, Mr. Harris. They'll be there in 3 minutes. I need you to stay with me. Is she breathing at all? I don't know. I don't think so. There's no pulse. Oh, God, Amy, please. Mr. Harris, I need you to continue CPR. Keep your hands in the center of her chest. Push hard and fast. Can you do that for me? Yes, I'm trying. Please hurry. Morrison kept him on the line, her voice steady and practiced, walking him through the compressions even as she noted the oddities. The way his panic seemed to surge and fade. The way he kept saying, please hurry, instead of focusing on his wife. The way the house behind his voice sounded completely silent. No other sounds of distress, no chaos, just his voice echoing in what must have been a very large space. 3 minutes later, Officer Rebecca Martinez's patrol car screamed up the circular driveway of 1247 Sheridan Place, her lights painting the pristine white columns in red and blue. The mansion loomed before her, its windows dark, except for a dim glow somewhere deep inside. For a house where someone was supposedly dying, it was eerily quiet. Martinez grabbed her radio as she approached the front door. Dispatch, I'm on scene at Sheridan Place. No visible activity. She tried the door, unlocked. It swung open into a marble foyer that belonged in a magazine spread, not a crime scene. Crystal chandelier, sweeping staircase, absolute silence. Lake Forest Police? Mr. Harris? Nothing. Martinez's hand drifted to her weapon. Something was wrong. The 911 call sounded frantic, desperate. So where was he? Mr. Harris, it's the police. Where are you? Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, a voice erupted from somewhere below. Down here, basement, please, help her. She's not breathing. The sudden explosion of sound after the oppressive silence made Martinez's pulse spike. She moved quickly toward the basement stairs, her partner, Officer Chen, arriving just behind her, their boots thundering down the hardwood steps. The basement was finished luxury, leather furniture, a full bar, recessed lighting that gave everything a golden glow, and in the center of it all, on the polished concrete floor, was Jimmy Harris. He was shirtless, his expensive dress shirt discarded beside him, his hands pressed against the chest of a woman lying motionless beneath him. His face was twisted in anguish, tears streaming down his cheeks as he pumped her chest in erratic, unpracticed compressions. "She's not waking up! Please, do something!" Martinez dropped to her knees beside them, her training kicking in automatically. The woman, Amy, the wife, was pale, her lips tinged with blue. But Martinez's eyes caught something else, a faint reddish mark along Amy's throat, just below her jawline. Not a bruise yet, but the beginning of one. "Mr. Harris, how long has she been down?" Jimmy looked up at her with wild eyes. "Maybe 20 minutes? I came home and found her like this. I think she might have tried to..." His voice broke. "Please, just save her." Martinez nodded to Chen, who was already pulling out the first aid kit. "Keep doing compressions while we set up the AED." But she was watching Jimmy Harris carefully now, watching the way his grief seemed to perform rather than exist, watching the way his hands, which should have been trembling with adrenaline, moved with an odd steadiness between his dramatic sobs. By 9:57 p.m., the basement had flooded with personnel, 2 more patrol units, a paramedic team led by EMT Sarah Chen. The small space that had been eerily quiet 10 minutes ago now buzzed with urgent professional chaos. And in the center of it all, Jimmy Harris suddenly stood up, his face contorting with fresh anguish. In one dramatic motion, he ripped off his undershirt, baring his chest as if the clothing itself was suffocating him. Then he collapsed to the floor, his back against the wall, his head in his hands. "I should have been here. I should have known. Oh God, Amy, I'm so sorry." Martinez watched him from the corner of her eye as the paramedics worked. She'd seen grief before, real grief. This was something else. It was too big, too performative, and it alternated with these strange moments of stillness, moments where Jimmy's face went completely blank, where he seemed to be calculating rather than feeling. She stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Harris, why don't you come upstairs with us? Let the paramedics do their work. You've done everything you can." Jimmy looked up at her with his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. For just a moment, Martina saw something flicker behind that desperation, something cold and aware. "I can't leave her. Not now." "Sir, the best thing you can do is give them space. Come on." Slowly, reluctantly, Jimmy allowed himself to be guided toward the stairs. Martinez kept her hand near her weapon, her instincts screaming that something was very, very wrong with this scene. They were halfway up the stairs when a voice cut through the controlled chaos below. EMT Chen's voice, sharp and urgent, carrying a note that made every cop in the room freeze. "Wait, I've got something. I've got a pulse." Martinez felt Jimmy Harris stop on the step beside her. She turned to look at him, to see the relief that should have been flooding his face. But what she saw instead made her blood run cold. For just a heartbeat, maybe less, Jimmy Harris's face didn't show relief. It didn't show joy. It showed something that looked almost like rage, like frustration, like the desperate calculation of a man whose carefully laid plans had just shattered. Then, like a mask sliding back into place, the anguished husband returned. "She's alive! Oh God, she's alive!" But Martinez had seen it. That flicker of truth beneath the performance. And as they stood frozen on that staircase, the sound of the paramedics working frantically below them, Martinez's hand finally settled fully on her weapon. Because in that split second, Jimmy Harris had revealed everything. If you're really interested in seeing how this story unfolds, please consider liking this video. It helps us reach more people who appreciate true crime storytelling. And if you want to see more cases like this, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your comments also help guide what cases we cover next, so let us know what you think down below. Martinez guided Jimmy Harris up the basement stairs and into the kitchen, her hand still hovering near her weapon. The space was immaculate. White marble countertops, stainless steel appliances that gleamed under recessed lighting. Everything in its place. Everything is perfect. For about 5 seconds. Then Jimmy exploded. Without warning, he swept his arm across the counter, sending a crystal vase filled with white lilies crashing against the wall. Glass shattered. Water splashed across the pristine white tile. His chest heaved as he stared at the destruction, his hands trembling. Martinez and Chen exchanged a glance. This wasn't grief. This was rage. "Mr. Harris," Martinez said carefully, "I need you to take a breath." Before Jimmy could respond, Detective Frank Kowalski walked through the front door, his weathered face taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of 30 years on the job. He'd been called in from home. Suspected suicide attempts in Lake Forest's wealthy enclave always required a detective's touch. "Mr. Harris, I'm Detective Kowalski. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions while everything's fresh. Can you walk me through your evening?" Jimmy pressed his palms against the counter, his head bowed. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "We dropped our daughter Sophia and her friend at the Lake Forest High School basketball game, around 6:30. Then Amy and I went to the whiskey room downtown for drinks." "And then what happened?" "We got into an argument, a bad one. Amy got upset and walked home. I drove separately." He paused, his jaw working. "When I got here, the argument continued. I told her I needed space to cool off, so I went upstairs and turned on the TV, tried to watch a movie, anything to decompress." Kowalski made notes on his phone, his expression neutral. "What time did you go check on her?" "When it was time to pick up Sophia, around 9:30. I went to find Amy and—" His voice cracked. "She was in the basement, just lying there, not moving. Does your wife have any history of depression, suicidal thoughts?" Jimmy looked up sharply. "Nothing. Never. She's always been so strong. This came out of nowhere." His eyes glistened. "I'm hoping I wake up from this nightmare." Kowalski studied him. No history of mental health issues, but somehow a woman ends up nearly dead in her basement. The math wasn't adding up. The basement door burst open. EMT Sarah Chan emerged, her face flushed with urgency. "We've got a pulse. She's fighting." The kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. Officers grabbed radios. Chen sprinted for the ambulance. And there, in the center of it all, stood Jimmy Harris. The body cam footage would later show it frame by frame. That half second where Jimmy's face didn't register relief or joy. Instead, his jaw clenched. His eyes went cold and flat. Something that looked disturbingly like frustration rippled across his features. The expression of a man watching his plans disintegrate. Martina saw it. Her hand moved instinctively toward her radio. Then the mask slammed back into place. Jimmy rushed toward the basement stairs. "Thank God! Is she okay? Can I see her?" 2 officers stepped into his path. "Sir, let the EMTs work. We need you to stay up here." Minutes later, they wheeled Amy past on a stretcher, her oxygen mask covering her pale face, her chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate breaths. She looked impossibly fragile under the harsh hallway lights. Detective Kowalski watched Jimmy Harris watch his wife. And in that moment, standing in the wreckage of the perfect kitchen, Kowalski felt the familiar weight of certainty settling in his gut. Something about this doesn't add up. And whatever the truth was, Amy Harris had just bought herself very little time to tell it. The ambulance screamed away from 1247 Sheridan Place, its sirens cutting through the quiet wealth of Lake Forest. Inside, paramedics worked frantically over Amy Harris as they raced the 2 miles to Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital. Every second counted. Back at the mansion, Detective Kowalski turned to Jimmy. "Mr. Harris, you'll need to call your daughter. Let her know what's happening." Jimmy nodded, pulling out his phone with steady hands. His voice, when he spoke, was eerily controlled, calm, almost flat. "Sophia, honey, there's been an emergency with Mom. Don't leave the school. Stay with your friend's parents. I'll explain everything soon." A pause. "I love you too. Just stay there." He ended the call, then immediately dialed another number. Officer Martinez watched as Jimmy's entire demeanor transformed. His face crumpled. His voice became a wailing, hysterical mess. "Mom, Mom, I don't know what to do. Amy tried to kill herself. This is terrible. I can't lose her. Please, I need you." Martinez stepped closer, studying his face. The performance was impressive, except for one critical detail. Despite the sobbing, despite the voice breaking with apparent anguish, there wasn't a single tear on Jimmy Harris's face. Not one. She made a mental note of that. "Mr. Harris," Kowalski said once Jimmy ended the call, "we need you to wait outside while we process the scene. Standard procedure." Jimmy nodded, allowing himself to be escorted out. As the front door closed behind him, Kowalski turned back to the basement, his jaw set. Time to find out what really happened down there. The forensic team followed him down, cameras already flashing. Under the bright work lights they'd set up, the basement looked less like a luxury retreat and more like what it actually was, a crime scene. Kowalski's eyes went immediately to the ceiling beam where Jimmy claimed he'd found Amy hanging. He pulled out his measuring tape, 6 feet, 8 inches from the floor. "Amy Harris is 5'7", he said to the forensic tech beside him. "If she hung from here, her feet would be touching the ground." The tech nodded, photographing the beam. No chair, no stool, no ladder anywhere nearby. So how did she supposedly hang herself? Kowalski studied the rope marks on the beam. They looked wrong. Too shallow, too uniform. Not the deep grooves you'd expect from a body's full weight pulling down over time. These looked like someone had rubbed a rope back and forth, trying to create the appearance of a hanging. Staged. The crime scene photographer moved to Amy's neck injuries, capturing the faint bruising that was already beginning to darken. Kowalski leaned in, his stomach tightening. The bruise pattern was wrong. Hanging victims had a specific mark, an inverted V shape where the ligature pulled up and back. Amy's bruises were horizontal, encircling, consistent with pressure applied from the front. Manual strangulation. "Bag everything," Kowalski said quietly. "This is not a suicide attempt." Near the basement storage area, another officer called out, "Detective, I've got something." Amy's purse lay half hidden behind a stack of storage boxes. Inside, beneath the lipstick and wallet and scattered receipts, was a burner phone, the cheap, prepaid kind that people bought when they didn't want to be tracked. Kowalski held it up in a gloved hand. Get this as evidence. Could be critical. Outside, Jimmy Harris sat in the back of a squad car, his head in his hands, the picture of devastation. Martinez approached, tapping on the window. Jimmy looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mr. Harris, we're going to need you to come to the station for a formal statement." "Of course, anything to help." His voice was small, broken. "I just want to know Amy's okay. Can I go to the hospital?" Kowalski stepped up beside Martinez. "We'll update you as soon as we hear anything. Right now, we need to understand exactly what happened tonight." For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, Jimmy's eyes flickered, cold, calculating, measuring his next move. Then they softened, filling with desperate concern. "I understand, Detective. Whatever you need." 2 miles away, Dr. Michael Chen bent over Amy Harris in the emergency room, his experienced hands carefully examining her injuries. His brow furrowed, then furrowed deeper. Finally, he straightened and reached for the phone. "Get me Detective Kowalski. Lake Forest PD. Now. When Kowalski answered, Dr. Chen's voice was grave. Detective, you need to see this. These injuries, they're not consistent with suicide. Not even close. 48 hours crawled by. In the ICU at Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital, Amy Harris lay motionless, machines breathing for her, her brain swelling from the trauma. The doctors used words like critical and uncertain. Jimmy sat in the waiting room, playing the devastated husband for the nurses who brought him coffee. But in a conference room at Lake Forest PD, Detective Kowalski was discovering that Amy Harris had been living a double life. The forensic tech looked up from her computer, eyes wide. Detective, you need to see this. The burner phone from Amy's purse had given up its secrets. 2 years of text messages with someone identified only as M. Kowalski scrolled through them, his jaw tightening with each screen. I can't wait until we're free. He'll never let me go. Soon, baby, soon. And then, the last message, sent at 6:47 p.m. on the night of the incident, just 3 hours before the 911 call. Meeting tonight. I'm finally telling him I'm leaving. The tech team traced the number within an hour. Marcus Reynolds, 41 years old, financial advisor at Weston & Associates in downtown Chicago. No criminal record, by all accounts, a decent man who'd fallen in love with a woman in a cage. They brought him in that afternoon. Marcus walked into the interrogation room looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with red. Before Kowalski could even introduce himself, Marcus's voice cracked. Is she alive? Please, God, just tell me she's alive. She's in critical condition, Kowalski said carefully. Mr. Reynolds, I need you to tell me about your relationship with Amy Harris. What poured out was a love story twisted by fear. 2 years of stolen moments, secret phone calls, desperate plans for escape. They'd met at a coffee shop, one of Amy's rare unsupervised outings. She'd been sitting alone, and Marcus had asked if the seat across from her was taken. She was trapped, Marcus said, his voice raw. Jimmy controlled everything, her phone, her money, who she could see. She couldn't even buy groceries without him knowing. She was terrified of him. Marcus admitted they'd been planning Amy's escape. He'd rented an apartment in Milwaukee under a fake name, new bank accounts, new documents, everything was ready. We were going to leave next month. She was finally ready. His voice broke. But she wanted to tell him face to face. She said she owed him that much. I begged her not to. I told her to just run, but she wouldn't listen. Kowalski leaned forward. Did Amy ever mention Jimmy being violent? Marcus hesitated, his hands clenching into fists. She said she'd never hit her, but last year there was an incident. He choked her during an argument, just for a few seconds. She said she apologized afterward, cried, swore it would never happen again. He looked up, his eyes fierce. That's when she contacted me about getting out. That's when she knew she couldn't stay. There it was. Motive, clear as day. Amy Harris hadn't tried to kill herself, she tried to escape, and Jimmy Harris decided death was easier than divorce. His phone buzzed. Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital. Dr. Chen's voice was grave. Detective, you need to know. Amy's condition just deteriorated. Brain activity is declining rapidly. She's not going to make it. The family needs to make a decision about life support. Kowalski's blood ran cold. If Amy Harris died, this became a murder investigation, and Jimmy Harris became a killer. The fluorescent lights of Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital cast everything in cold, clinical white. In the ICU waiting room, Amy's family had gathered like mourners at a wake that hadn't ended yet. Candace Barnes sat with her parents, Robert and Diane Barnes, who'd driven through the night from Detroit. 15-year-old Sophia sat apart from them, her face pale and hollow, caught between the family that loved her mother and the father who'd destroyed her. When Jimmy Harris walked through the automatic doors, Candace was on her feet instantly. No. Her voice cut through the quiet space like a blade. You don't get to be here." Jimmy's face was a mask of grief. "Candace, please. She's my wife. You did this to her." Candace's voice rose, raw with rage. "You killed my sister. Everyone knows it." Security guards moved in quickly, their hands raised in placating gestures. Jimmy stood perfectly still, his voice measured and soft. "I loved her. I would never hurt her." But Candace saw through it. They all did. Hours later, the hospital ethics board delivered their verdict. Dr. Chen stood before the family, his face grave. "I'm sorry, Amy is brain dead. There's no chance of recovery. You need to decide about life support." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. At 3:42 p.m. on November 18th, the machines stopped breathing for Amy. Barnes Harris. The monitors went flat. And Amy, who'd survived 2 years of planning, 1 night of terror, and 5 days of fighting, finally let go. The moment she died, everything changed. Medical examiner Dr. Patricia Simmons worked through the night, her practiced hands documenting what Jimmy Harris had tried to hide. The autopsy table didn't lie. Cause of death? Asphyxiation. But the mechanism told a different story. Petechial hemorrhaging, tiny burst blood vessels in Amy's eyes, classic sign of strangulation. The hyoid bone in her throat showed a stress fracture, the kind typically seen when someone's hands crush a windpipe. And the bruising pattern on her neck had finger-width spacing, 4 marks on one side, 1 on the other. Someone's hands, not a rope. The rope marks on Amy's neck were superficial, post-mortem, staged after death to create the illusion of suicide. Dr. Simmons typed her conclusion with steady fingers. This was not suicide. This is homicide. Detective Kowalski stood in the police conference room the next morning, facing a room full of investigators. Beside him stood FBI agent Larissa Washington, her expression grim. Jimmy Harris is a suspected underboss for the Chicago outfit. Multiple investigations over 15 years. 0 convictions. He's smart, careful, and heavily protected. She pulled up surveillance photos of Jimmy meeting with known mob associates. We've had wiretaps, surveillance, informants. Nothing sticks. If he killed Amy, this might be our only shot to take him down. 2 hours later, a convoy of police vehicles descended on 1247 Sheridan Place. The search warrant was comprehensive. Detectives flooded through the mansion, collecting evidence with methodical precision. Jimmy's computer, Amy's belongings, DNA samples, security camera hard drives. But it was the security footage that told the most damning story, or rather, the absence of it. The cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned between 8 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on November 17th, the exact window when Amy died. IT forensics determined the cameras hadn't malfunctioned. They'd been manually disabled from the security panel in Jimmy's study. In the master bedroom, a detective found Amy's real phone, the one Jimmy had controlled, hidden inside an HVAC vent. The phone was a time capsule of desperation. Diary entries, photos of bruises she'd carefully documented, Google searches that broke hearts, how to leave an abusive marriage, witness protection, secret bank accounts. And then the last diary entry, dated November 17th, the day she died. Detective Kowalski read it aloud to the assembled task force, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice steady. "Tonight, I'm telling Jimmy I'm leaving. Marcus is waiting for me. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Jimmy Harris is not who people think he is." The room fell silent. Amy Harris had written her own testimony from beyond the grave. Week 3 of the investigation and the forensic lab at Lake Forest PD had become a theater of scientific truth. Lead forensic engineer Dr. Robert Chang stood before a perfect replica of the Harris basement, complete with the same ceiling beam, the same rope, the same deadly geometry. "Let's see if Jimmy Harris's story holds up," he said. They suspended a mannequin, Amy's exact height of 5 feet 7 inches, from the replica beam at 6 feet 8 inches. The result was immediate and damning. The mannequin's feet touched the ground, knees slightly bent, body weight supported by its legs. Dr. Chang typed his report with clinical precision. The victim would need to actively hold herself up to achieve asphyxiation. Loss of consciousness would cause immediate collapse, breaking the hanging position. This scenario is biomechanically implausible. Translation: Amy couldn't have hung herself, even if she'd tried. The second experiment tested the rope itself. Forensic analysis revealed zero epithelial DNA from Amy. She'd never touched it, but rope fibers were found on Jimmy's clothing from that night. He'd handled it. He'd staged it. Detective Kowalski spread the timeline across the conference room wall, each piece of evidence a nail in Jimmy Harris's coffin. 6:30 p.m., Jimmy and Amy drop Sophia at a basketball game. 6:45 p.m., bar surveillance from the whiskey room shows them arguing, Jimmy's face twisted with rage. 7:23 p.m., Amy leaves alone. Witness statements confirm she looked frightened. 7:35 p.m., Amy's phone GPS shows her arriving home. 7:41 p.m., traffic cam catches Jimmy's car pulling into the driveway. 8 p.m., security cameras disabled from inside the house. 8:15 to 9:30 p.m., blank. No surveillance, no witnesses. Just Jimmy and Amy, alone in that basement. 9:47 p.m., the 911 call. But the cell phone forensics delivered the killing blow. At 7:52 p.m., just 11 minutes after arriving home, Jimmy had searched on his phone, "How long does strangulation take? Can someone survive hanging? Staging suicide scene." He deleted the searches, but forensic recovery doesn't forget. And then the text message, sent to Polly Moretti at 7:48 p.m., deleted immediately but preserved forever in digital memory. Problem handled. Make the call if anyone asks. I was with you all evening. Polly's response, "Boss, you sure about this?" Jimmy, "It's done. Don't contact me again tonight." The detectives brought Polly in the next morning. He walked into the interrogation room with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man in a $1,000 suit, and said exactly 2 words before refusing to speak further: no comment. But his phone records told the story he wouldn't. That night, between 8 and 9:30 p.m., Polly had called 3 other Chicago outfit associates, coordinating alibis, building walls. FBI agent Washington stood before the task force, her face grim. This is witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, conspiracy after the fact. Jimmy's whole operation is circling the wagons. They know we're coming. 2 days later, Kowalski's desk phone rang. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Detective Kowalski?" The voice was young, male, nervous. "You want the truth about Jimmy Harris? Talk to his stepson, Tyler Barnes, Amy's son from her first marriage. He knows what Jimmy's capable of." The line went dead. Kowalski stared at the phone, his mind racing. Tyler Barnes, 23 years old, living in California, and according to the file Kowalski pulled up, Tyler hadn't spoken to his mother in over 3 years. Why? The answer, Kowalski suspected, Asabio Bass, Atticus Gill, Kata Font, Carrie Hacken, Christy Corman, David Marshall, Danielle Marshall, Jerry Ebert, Jesse Scher, John Boitza, Kira Reed, Lee Holland, Mark Davis, Matt Fisher, Nathy Wyman, Peter Buckley, Rachel Katz, Ricky Reed, Sammy Kaufman, Siri Sevenpack, Sean Daniels, Cindy Grudden, Susan Yonner, Tommy Wells, Adam Billieu, and Tracy Hang, the Coronathib, and Peter and Sam Coble, Apaka Atabus Buvrek, Metalis and Elinda Genzankio, Carla Salinas, Christine Dursey, Dan Bergman, Dwayne Davis, Franz Miller, Geraldine Pothman, Jacqueline Burton, James Estes, Jack City, Janet Lowry, Joel Matheson, Kate Gagney, Karen Wilmer, Nicholas Roberts, Tanya Kosia, Thea Linus, Tony Foldy, Trisha Harness, and Volva Vofma, Anna Malie, Matt Rowland, Joseph Mello, Jan Sides, Jennifer Spanner, James Naba, John Batosh, Josh Baskin, Candace Pearson, Kathleen Cockler, Kim Thompson, Candace Hang, Michael Lewis, Patty Saylor, Pascal Brindler, Carrie Reed, Roger Brenner, Sammy Wire, Sandra Bagney, Daniel Spockle, Dwina, Ina Vi, and Tom Coylan. The answer, Kowalski suspected, was about to crack this case wide open. Tyler Barnes sat in a coffee shop near the University of Michigan campus in Ann Arbor, his hands wrapped around a cup he hadn't touched. At 19, he carried the weight of someone much older. Detective Kowalski and Agent Washington sat across from him, watching him wrestle with ghosts. "I moved out the second I turned 18, Tyler said finally, his voice hollow. I couldn't be in that house anymore. I couldn't watch what he was doing to her. Kowalski leaned forward. "Tyler, your mother is dead. We believe Jimmy killed her. Anything you tell us could help bring him to justice." Tyler's face crumpled. "I should have done something. I should have gotten her out." "Tell us what happened. Tell us what you saw." What Tyler revealed painted a portrait of systematic psychological warfare. It had started subtle after the wedding, Jimmy asking who Amy had talked to that day, checking her phone just to make sure everything's okay. Then it escalated. Tracking apps, reading her emails, interrogating her about every conversation. If she talked to anyone he didn't approve of, he'd punish her, Tyler said. Punish her how? Silent treatment for days, lock her out of bank accounts so she couldn't buy anything. Once, he took her car keys and made her ask his permission to leave the house, like she was a child, like she was his property. But it was Tyler's next revelation that made the detectives exchange glances. 2 years ago, I was 17. I came home from school early. His voice dropped. They were arguing in the kitchen. I don't even remember what about. But Jimmy had his hands around my mom's throat, not squeezing hard, but there, threatening, like showing her he could. Tyler's hands shook. I yelled at him to stop. He let go, but then he came at me, grabbed me by the throat, slammed me against the wall. His face was inches from mine. He told me if I ever disrespected him again, he'd make me regret it. Did you report it? No. Mom begged me not to. Jimmy told me that if I told anyone, cops, teachers, anyone, my mom would suffer the consequences. Tyler looked up, his eyes red. I was 17. I was terrified. Not for me, for her. That incident, Tyler explained, changed everything. That's when Mom started pulling away from him emotionally. She couldn't leave physically. He controlled everything. But she checked out, stopped pretending to be happy. I think that's when she started planning her escape. Kowalski closed his notebook. Tyler, we're going to need you to testify at trial. Can you do that? Tyler didn't hesitate. I'll do whatever it takes to put that monster away. He took my mom from me. He gets to answer for that. Back at Lake Forest PD, the evidence had formed an unbreakable chain. Motive, the affair with Marcus Reynolds and Amy's plan to leave. Means, manual strangulation, exactly matching the autopsy findings. Opportunity, alone with Amy during the camera blackout window. And now, pattern of violence, Tyler's testimony showing this wasn't impulse, it was escalation. The DA reviewed the case file late into the night. When she looked up, her decision was final. We have enough. Let's bring him in. Dawn broke cold and gray over Lake Forest on December 2nd. 6 FBI vehicles and 4 police cruisers descended on 1247 Sheridan Place simultaneously, their lights painting the pristine white columns in red and blue. Detective Kowalski led the team through the front door. They found Jimmy Harris in his study, dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour, sitting behind his mahogany desk as if he'd been expecting them. James Harris, you are under arrest for the first-degree murder of Amy Barnes Harris. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Jimmy's face remained perfectly calm. No rage, no fear, just cold calculation. His eyes met Kowalski's, and when he spoke, his voice was ice. You have no idea who you're dealing with, detective. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. 6 months later, Cook County Criminal Court in downtown Chicago had become the center of a media firestorm. State versus Jimmy James Harris was the kind of trial that made careers and destroyed reputations. The gallery was packed every single day. Assistant DA Jennifer Walsh had an 87% conviction rate for a reason. She was relentless, methodical, and she knew how to make a jury care. Across from her sat Martin Kessler, a defense attorney whose client list read like a who's who of Chicago organized crime. If you had money and a dark secret, Kessler was your man. Jury selection alone took 3 weeks. The defense challenged anyone with law enforcement ties, anyone who'd lost a loved one to violence, anyone who might see past Jimmy Harris's expensive suits to the monster underneath. When opening statements finally began, Walsh stood before the jury box with quiet intensity. Jimmy Harris is a man used to control, she said. Control over his business, control over his associates, and absolute control over his wife. When he discovered Amy Barnes Harris was leaving him, when he realized control was slipping through his fingers, he made sure she never could. The evidence will show he strangled her with his bare hands, staged a suicide scene, and called 911 to cover his tracks. But science doesn't lie, witnesses don't lie, and Amy's own words from beyond the grave will convict him. Kessler's opening was smooth, sympathetic, designed to plant doubt. Amy Barnes Harris was a troubled woman trapped in a secret affair, drowning in guilt, he told the jury. The prosecution wants you to believe my client, a man with no criminal record, a respected businessman, a devoted father, is a cold-blooded killer? But the evidence is circumstantial at best. Suicide is tragic. It destroys families, but it's not murder. Over the next 3 weeks, Walsh built her case brick by brick. Dr. Patricia Simmons took the stand, her testimony clinical and devastating. She showed the jury autopsy photos, Amy's neck bruising with finger-width spacing. These injuries are consistent with manual strangulation, not hanging. This is what happens when human hands crush a windpipe. Dr. Robert Chang demonstrated the biomechanical impossibility of the staged suicide. The jury watched video reconstruction showing the mannequin's feet touching ground. She couldn't have hung herself even if she wanted to. Marcus Reynolds broke down on the stand, describing Amy's fear, her secret plans to escape, her final text, "I'm telling him tonight." His voice cracked. "I should have stopped her. I should have known he'd kill her." But it was Tyler Barnes who made the jury lean forward. At 19, Amy's son sat in the witness box and described watching Jimmy choke his mother, then being slammed against a wall himself. He told me if I said anything, my mom would suffer. 2 years later, she was dead. I'll never forgive myself for staying quiet. Detective Kowalski walked the jury through the evidence methodically. Deleted searches, disabled cameras, staged crime scene, deleted text to Polly Moretti. Each piece damning, each piece irrefutable. Kessler's defense was aggressive but thin. Character witnesses, country club members, and business associates testified Jimmy was a devoted husband and pillar of the community. Defense medical expert Dr. Alan Hirsch suggested the injuries could have resulted from aggressive CPR attempts, that hanging was theoretically possible. The defense's theory, Amy killed herself out of guilt over her affair. Jimmy found her and panicked, staging the scene poorly due to shock and grief. Then came the moment that made even seasoned court reporters hold their breath. Jimmy Harris took the stand. It was a risk. Defendants rarely testified, but Jimmy was confident, composed, his voice steady, and said, "I loved my wife," he said, looking directly at the jury. "Was our marriage perfect? No. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But I would never, ever hurt her." Finding Amy like that, his voice broke convincingly. It destroyed me. I panicked, made bad decisions during the investigation because I was devastated, not because I was guilty. Walsh's cross-examination was surgical. The Jimmy never wavered. He had an answer for everything, plausible deniability wrapped in grief. After 4 weeks of testimony, closing arguments concluded. The jury filed out to deliberate. 11 hours over 2 days, the courtroom waited in silence, reporters camping outside, families holding their breath. Finally, the knock. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was a powder keg. Every seat filled, reporters lined against the back wall, cameras crowding the hallway outside. Candace Barnes sat in the front row with Tyler, Marcus Reynolds, and Amy's parents. Their faces were pale, braced for impact. Jimmy Harris sat at the defense table in another expensive suit, his face carved from stone. No emotion, no tell. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the tension. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On count 1, first-degree murder, what is your verdict?" "Not guilty." Gasps erupted. Candace began crying, her hands covering her face. Tyler stared ahead in disbelief. "On count 2, second-degree murder, what is your verdict?" "Guilty." The courtroom exploded. Tyler pulled Candace into an embrace. Marcus buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Amy's mother sobbed openly. It wasn't the verdict they'd wanted, but it was justice nonetheless. Jimmy's jaw clenched, the only visible reaction. Otherwise, he remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the judge. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order. I will have order in this courtroom." She turned to Jimmy. "Sentencing will be set for 4 weeks from today." Outside, D.A. Walsh faced a wall of microphones. "While we believed first-degree murder was the appropriate charge, justice has been served today. Jimmy Harris will spend decades in prison for taking Amy's life. That's what matters." Kessler stood beside his client, professional to the end. "We're disappointed with this verdict and will appeal immediately. This conviction is based on speculation, not evidence." 4 weeks later, the courtroom reconvened for sentencing. Judge Morrison allowed victim impact statements. Tyler Barnes approached the stand, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. "Jimmy Harris didn't just kill my mother. He stole years of her life before he took her last breath. She died afraid, alone, at the hands of the man who promised to love her. I'll never get her back, but I'll make sure her story isn't forgotten." Candace spoke next, her voice raw. "My sister was a light in this world. Jimmy snuffed that light out because he couldn't control her anymore. I hope he spends every day in prison thinking about what he took from us." Marcus Reynolds barely made it through his statement. Amy deserved to be free, to be happy. Instead, she died terrified. "I'll live with the guilt of not protecting her for the rest of my life, but Jimmy Harris will live with his guilt behind bars." Finally, Judge Morrison addressed the defendant. "Mr. Harris, you have been convicted of second-degree murder. The evidence overwhelmingly shows you took your wife's life in a moment of rage and control. The law requires justice, and justice demands accountability." She paused, letting the weight settle. "I hereby sentence you to 25 years to life in Illinois State Penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for 20 years. Jimmy Harris, 43 years old, would be at minimum 63 before he could even be considered for release. As bailiffs approached with shackles, Jimmy rose slowly. His eyes found Detective Kowalski across the courtroom. They locked their gazes for a long moment. No words were exchanged, but the message was as clear as ice. This isn't over. Then he was gone, led away in chains, disappearing through a side door to begin his decades behind bars. 3 years later, Tyler Barnes walked across the stage at the University of Michigan, diploma in hand. He dedicated his degree to his mother, speaking her name into a microphone so everyone would hear. Amy Barnes Harris. This is for you, Mom. 6 months after graduation, Tyler established the Amy's Voice Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping domestic violence victims escape abusive relationships. Marcus Reynolds became the organization's first volunteer, honoring Amy's memory by saving the lives she couldn't save herself. In his office at Lake Forest PD, Detective Kowalski kept the Harris case file on his desk. Not because it was unsolved, it was closed, convicted, justice served, but because it reminded him something important. Justice, though slow and imperfect, eventually comes for those who believe they're untouchable. Amy Barnes Harris had been silenced in life, but in death, her voice had roared louder than Jimmy Harris could ever have imagined. She was remembered, she was honored, she would never be forgotten. Amy's story ended with justice, but the fight against domestic violence continues every single day. If this story moved you, if you believe Amy's courage deserves to be shared, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that expose the truth and honor the victims who couldn't tell their own stories. Drop a comment below. What did you think of this verdict? Was justice truly served? Or should Jimmy Harris have gotten first-degree murder? And tell me, would you want to see part 2 exploring what happens to Jimmy Harris in prison or Tyler's journey building Amy's voice? Your comments decide what story we tell next, because some stories are too important to end with just one chapter. Amy's voice lives on. Make sure it's heard.